forgot this little thing that goes on top of your tripod that holds your phone. So I had to make this thing up. But I think it will cover it. So my name is Willi, and I'm from the Bay Area. I took an Uber here after an airplane. So I'm a little tired, but it's good to see you.
Yeah, you as well. Welcome.
What I want to try to start out with is just talk a little bit about what the difference is between a ritual and a tradition. What do you think the difference is?
One steeped more in, I don't know, like a spirituality or something all around it, where tradition is just something that happens over and over again.
Huh. Okay, I probably would have defined them just the opposite. So we're in good hands here. How would you define it, the tradition versus a ritual?
A ritual, to me, would be a fairly, I wouldn't say strict, but an organized series of actions or words intended to produce some kind of, I don't know, feeling of community or spiritual unity. A ritual is a way of communing, really, I think. And I think a tradition, I'm part of, it's interesting, I'm a Unitarian Universalist, so we have something called a living tradition. We sing the living tradition as part of our services. And a tradition is, it's an ongoing community process. Any ongoing community process would be a tradition in my view.
I have a very different answer.
Listen up. What's your answer?
A ritual is passed down by experts, where the other is passed by word of mouth. Traditions are passed by word of mouth, and just from individual communities, where the other is more of a specialized sort of passing on.
Who can tell me what traditions are in permaculture these days?
Say that one more time.
What traditions are in permaculture? What traditions are celebrated as such in permaculture? And that really is why we're talking today.
Right.
We'll get to the next steps. Are there any traditions you can mention?
I think the group meal is a tradition.
Ooh.
The group meal.
Group meal?
Yeah, coming together as a community for
like
food.
A potluck.
Like a potluck, right.
Well, everybody has potlucks, so everybody has.
Oh, it doesn't count, but it's just because, so you're saying specific to permaculture.
Right.
If you have a really good idea, share it.
Yes.
Is that the tradition?
Yes.
I like it. Yes, that's true.
Don't try to hide it off and wait till Wall Street says, okay, we'll make it a good idea.
Well, I would say that traditions are like the collective experience of those who come before us that are passed on to us. And so it's usually unique to different regions, and you may not even remember why people used to do it that way, but it's worked so well in the past, you continue doing it that way in the present.
Hi. Thank you.
I would posit that the convergence itself is a tradition of permaculture, right?
Sure.
It's fairly obvious. It's happening year after year, and that's the positive side. Any other ideas about traditions or even rituals within permaculture? Sir, do you have any ideas?
Well, I assume you might be talking a little about some of the community things.
Yeah, well, I'll talk about anything. I have no preconceived notion.
Well, I mean, when you nixed the idea that potluck was part of it, I thought, well, maybe because at the Vegan Food Forest, we harvest and provide and contribute from within for those kind of dinners. So that's something that we do.
Okay.
But I don't know if other, because we're having potluck, we're having some kind of potluck tonight too. But is that specific to the annual gathering? That kind of
Okay.
mealage.
I would say maybe that harvest, the fall harvest, is another possible tradition celebrated by permaculturists and lots of other people too.
Yeah.
Right.
I guess what I'm trying to get at is there aren't a lot of specific traditions, and we need more to have social glue and to have staying power and to attract more people to the cause.
But what I love the most about the permaculture is you have the ethics and you have your principles, but how you get it done is how you get it done and adapt it to your climate, your what you want to do, your whatever. I like that it isn't on Tuesday at 9 p.m. you must do this.
True. That's true. I agree. Okay. Well, that's interesting. I have listed here some common elements from a permaculture convergence. How many of these things have you experienced so far in the list?
How many have I avoided because I didn't want to be a part of it?
All right. I like your answer so far. Devil's advocate 101 here. Well, that's true. I haven't done a whole lot of these either. I mean, I walked into this hall and I thought, wow, what a cave. What bad energy. I can't really sit here. Gotta go outside. So I probably missed the meetings and the handshakes and a great lunch. So, you pick and choose. But not all those parts of this convergence list is something you experience today, right? You have to sit and watch your phone, text your people. That's not a part of this game. You still got your regular life. Okay. All right. Well, let's look at this matrix because there's a lot of power here. It's a lot of complexity, but you can choose to pick words or ideas from each quadrant. Think about how they mesh or don't mesh. You can just pick out one. I really like the top column, which talks about the metaphors. Do you guys have any other metaphors for the convergence than I've listed here? When you think about it, what is sort of the big symbol of the thing?
The earth.
Melting pot.
Earth is good. What else?
Melting pot.
A melting pot, an actual pot that's melting on the stove.
You know how they say America's a melting pot.
Right.
A lot of people coming together, integrating it. So, there's a point to all this. Just be patient.
Biochar was what I was just at. Social biochar.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the things I'm going to try to instill upon you people is that permaculture is a creation mythology, which is it's really new and it's budding, it's building awareness, gaining popularity. It's creating something else, and in that sort of nascent form, it needs a lot of help. We need to be conscious of what it's doing, what it needs. Okay, so do you see that creation mythology? That the stories are budding out of this thing? Did you buy that?
Were you here for the keynote last night?
No, I wasn't.
Okay. So what I liked about the guy, really, quit his corporate job, kind of traveled around the world, talked to native people, and said, why am I so fucked up and why are my people so fucked up? And then they're like, sit down, we'll tell you. So just because the white folks are getting it doesn't mean it's...
Okay.
Yeah, that's. I mean, I think that's really significant because, like, even if you look at ancient white folk culture in Europe, like let's say before the Industrial Revolution, a lot of these things that we talk about these days were practiced. Natural building. Nobody was like, oh yeah, I'm doing natural building. Everybody built their house of cob or sod or like it wasn't a thing. And yeah, I don't think that permaculture is a creation story. I think it's an end times story. Yeah,
I believe you. I agree with you. I'm just trying to be positive.
Yeah, Yeah, no, I
I'm
understand.
an apocalypse optimist.
Yeah.
Solutions, practical solutions.
No, we're
Easily
inclined.
implementable solutions. Don't put money into Wall Street solutions.
Right. Well, this civilization's in decline. This white, let's call it the white culture because that's what it is in decline. Like if you look at and I can't remember who wrote, the guy who just recently wrote a book about it. I mean, a few years ago. What's the name? Jared somebody? No.
Jared Diamond?
Yeah, Jared Diamond just wrote Collapse like 3-4 years ago. And it's obvious if you look at the trajectory of our civilization that we're about to collapse. And to me, permaculture is how we as a species survive and create a culture that embraces life instead of, well, money. Stuff. Right.
So do you believe that permaculture is an end times myth?
End times, beginning times myth.
Yeah.
If the white culture is re-recognizing a way of doing things, re-recognizing,
Yeah.
then that means that if you're in on the beginning of the myth isn't, say, Noah, and the myth isn't Adam and Eve. The myth could be, oh, we've always been Atlantis. Okay, so let's just drop our facade, drop our bossiness, and come on, people, now love your brother and sister, because that's what it's going to be. Because if the white way is dying, then there's going to be a new way. We're obviously not all going to go down when the comet comes. Some of us will survive, some of us white people, and we'll have to be co-individuals with people instead of bossy individuals. So I think, yes, it is a creation myth, but it's also it's a now myth. It's happening now, but the rebirth will happen now too. So.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like, every end is a beginning.
Yeah.
Where do you land on this starting ending thing?
The human species has been here for a lot longer than the 10,000 or so trajectory that this culture has been on, which has been alienated from life and at war with life. And I actually disagree with the term it being a white culture, because I think the rise and fall of these civilizations, which seem to just be regurgitations of each other, the planet's so giving, it's just taken 10,000 years for us to finally hit some limits. And so now we're facing it and sort of remembering our indigeneity to this planet in a new way. So it's like nothing's linear. It's like cyclical, but it's also a spiral. Like we're not returning to the same place. It's like the same place yet a little bit. It's different. So
Yeah, for example, now we have plastics everywhere.
Yeah.
right.
And that's something that life itself is going to adapt to.
Right.
In some cases, yeah. I mean, there are things that eat plastic.
And there are some things that we've created out of chaos and horror that actually could be of great benefit to the planet. Like our ability to track asteroids and deflect them if they were to hit the planet. You know, from the planet's perspective, if she wants to create life, then having a comet come and reset everything may not be in her best interest. So having a species that can protect that somehow, maybe that's what one of our purposes are. So that can become
I
the
think people, I don't know, it's like maybe Earth wants to wipe out the humans and restart over. It could be a good thing.
well, that's assuming that the Earth doesn't have intentions and sentience of her own, and led to us for a reason as well.
Yeah, that's part.
So that's all
part of
lines
our
of me.
mythology too. Is like human beings are just a result of the processes of life. Like we're not actually like as highly as we think of ourselves. We're not any better than a pig.
Mm-hmm.
Like not really. You know, like the planet or the life force that I think of as the goddess. It's not going to wipe us out any more than it's going to wipe the pigs out. We're the ones who will wipe ourselves out if that happens. You know, it's not going to be. You know, it's not going to be anybody's fault but ours. You know, when human civilization collapses. You know, so.
But I've been finding, now that we study more about the microbiology and the virome and all these other kinds of things, what is so fascinating to me, it was what my real aha is that we better be happy that these little microorganisms, these invisible forces, if you will, find use for us, because none of this would be happening if it wasn't for them. You know, the mitochondria going into a cell. The latest thing I heard was only in humans is we'll take up this little critter out of our gut and transport it up into our brain, and maybe that's the reason why our brains is different from the chimpanzee, because of this little microorganisms. There are animals where if there isn't a microorganism there organizing the show, the development, that organ system doesn't develop normally. So I mean, it's, you know, another jaw-dropping thing when you start knowing more about nature.
Yeah. Well, to me, that's like the interconnectedness.
Oh
You
yeah.
know, and I feel like that's should be. We're going to talk about myth, like, and how humans got here. I think it's the permaculture idea that we're interconnected and not separate. You know, we're very powerful in many ways. Not a whole lot of other animals, and there are other animals that move Earth, you know, and create new environments. That there are other animals that do that. Well, ants are a good example, termites are a good example. They found out octopuses do it. You know, they create environments to produce fishing grounds for themselves. You know, but we're the ones who have mastered it, so to speak.
Kind of.
Well, to the extent that our fragile psyches can handle that, you know.
So who thinks that permaculture is a spiritual practice?
I
I do.
Really?
I think inherently it has
Define
to be.
spiritual.
Well, this gentleman can do it because he raised his hand. What would you tell her about spiritual permaculture?
It was a new thing to me just this very weekend, because I considered myself just a friend of a farmer, and we have a good time with folks, but they're my friends' friends. And then I come here and I have to sit in with my friends, so I can't go to this social permaculture thing that I got to think, and I read it and it's like, oh my God, I've been a social permaculturalist all this time, because I never studied permaculture. I didn't know in the basics until I did a breakout that, like, oh yeah, there's a spiritual aspect. I'm like, all these people that I've been working with knew there was a spiritual aspect in permaculture, and I had no idea. It's like, oh, but I guess I did.
How do you define spiritual?
Define spiritual.
Yeah.
What's spiritual about it?
Where the individual thinks of themselves in the universe. Themselves. Can't be the best Buddha? He was. Got to be the best Sean Jonas. So that's all I can do. But I always have these philosophical and existential questions wrapped in the spirituality of, you know, who I am, what's my purpose, but some of the individual's thoughts of how and why me here, there, now, that's spirituality. Is the one individual thinking, now that I have recognition of my sentience, how do I behave going forward before I croak? Because I behaved in a certain way until I knew that, like, oh, I could be nice to people. That's spirituality to me. And I didn't know that until this weekend.
You raised your hand almost immediately. You startled me. So what's spiritual about permaculture for you?
I think the spirituality stems from the social permaculture, for sure. And I do think it comes, like, there is a fact, part of it comes from, you know, recognizing yourself and looking into yourself. Like, one of the permaculture principles is like self-regulation, accepting feedback, and that kind of thing. But I do think a big part of the spirituality of it is being able to see how you are connected to everything else. Like, I'm coming at permaculture from this background of ecology. I just graduated with my bachelor's in biology with a focus on ecosystem restoration, and ecology is like my passion. So a lot of this makes sense really intuitively to me, that you can't change something, one part of a system, without the other parts being changed as well. And so I think that's where the spirituality comes into it for me, is the connection between yourself and how you view yourself and how you hold yourself, and just who you are and how that can, you know, radiate outward to everyone else, and they affect you as well, and not just the people, but the land and the animals. Yeah.
Well, I've always been challenged by the scientists because of my spiritual beliefs.
Don't listen.
I had a lot of problems early on. They didn't want to deal with religion or spirituality. Now it seems to be very common, which is heartfelt. So you heard somebody, you pinged that response. You went like this. The interconnectedness, I think.
As someone who practices gratitude, often blissful, just in awe, jaw-dropping of the natural world and how it gets things done, atheist, the definition of spiritual that I like, and ooh, I think I got it this way, and I think she added it on. I don't like what she added on. But Brene Brown her definition of spiritual is the belief that we are somehow all connected. And I think that leaves everybody in, because I can say, you need oxygen, I need oxygen, you know, and however you want to connect with somebody else. I love that. We are somehow all connected, which is basically what you're saying.
I feel like that's just a reality. Like, and I don't say this from a perspective of I am a mystic, but I don't say it from the mystical perspective. I say it from the scientific perspective, because it is a fact that we are all connected. Like, all of our cells came from the exact same supernova. Like, I mean, our atoms came from the exact.
Stardust.
We are, yeah, and the relation, not just the relationships that we have with each other, but the relationship that we have with our environment, profoundly impacts our health and well-being. You know, and so I mean, to me, it's not a belief. Why would it have to be a belief? Like, you know, scientists don't believe in gravity; they observe it. You know, so
And
that's
what is
all.
gravity? We have no idea.
We have,
we do, actually.
Yeah, they've found the quantum particle now.
But there's always going to be another question.
There will be.
How does
yeah.
how do quantum particles?
Right.
The mystery
right.
continues on and on.
Right. Well, if you go back far enough, the question is always, how did it all start?
Right.
And the answer is, we don't know.
To me, that's spirituality.
So that's spirituality.
And so I would like to separate the world into things like gravity that we didn't make up, and things like money, which we totally made up.
Yeah.
Whatever else in this natural world you want to say, and our political system. You know, there's things that we totally made up that don't have to be that way. Versus, we cannot declare that Wisconsin will be gravity-free.
Right.
You know?
No amount of money can prevent a tree from growing.
So,
Pay someone to do something.
See, you can pay someone to cut it down, but no amount of money can prevent the seed from taking root. You know, that's my.
And we can't pay that seed to grow if it's not going to.
No, exactly.
Right.
Right, you can't pay the seed to grow either.
so let's pick out a new guy.
New guy.
We have been pretty much, agreeing on spiritual aspects of permaculture, which to me is bizarre. That's not how I was right. What's sacred about permaculture? Can you give me an idea about sacredness?
I think you'd have to define the term first.
Oh, I'm asking you to define it.
I suppose the sacred would be however we define it, so it changes from perspective to perspective. No, I kind of come from the perspective that all things, the sacred and the profane, it's all part of the same organism. Yeah.
Uh,
All right, let's pass the buck. Who else wants to talk about the sacred of
I
permaculture?
think it's important that you use that word.
It is?
What do we regard as sacred?
Right,
So the
so-
Greeks, I think, defined it as what is good, what is true, and what is beautiful. How do you answer those big questions? And other big questions. And permaculture absolutely has to answer those questions. It's what the principles are based on, it's what the ethics are based on.
Okay. So what's beautiful about permaculture?
There's a lot of things that are beautiful about them.
Well,
You're asking him.
no, not necessarily.
Being part of the life
I'll
force.
ask you, since you're another newcomer. What's beautiful about permaculture?
Well, I think that I can speak for myself, but then I think that in speaking for myself, I'm imagining that others relate to what I'm saying, because I think that our hearts and our brains are evolved in this way, and that it has to do with nature, and it has to do with our connected, or not, I don't like to say connection with nature, because we are a part of nature, but so our being a part of nature is, to me, what's sacred. And so just that, the rejoining of nature, the ability to imagine myself and my community living as I should be in nature. And that doesn't mean living in a cave somewhere, but it means, living natural materials with food that I grow, with using the elements as, to meet my needs in respectful ways, and all of those kinds of things. And I feel like that, when you take permaculture courses, you almost always see people going through these childhood, they start doing their childhood traumas and all of that sort of thing. And I feel like that is because we're so deeply moved by rejoining nature that we start to really dig deep into what feels right or what really feels wrong for us personally. So, to me, that's really sacred and really deep work.
So nature is a big driver here of spirituality and sacredness. Is that how others see it too?
And I don't even know if I always have trouble with using that word spirituality, because to me it's the heart connection. And our heart connection to being. Because there can be so much significance attached to the word spirituality that means something so different to each one of us. But I think heart connection is something that's more clearly understood and felt and universal. That's my feeling. Heart connection, yeah.
Cool. Anybody want to add on to that?
There was so much background noise there for a second. What's the topic again? I forgot.
Well, it went in and out of sacredness, and then it went back to spirituality.
Right.
Permaculture.
Yeah. What's sacred about permaculture? What's beautiful, true? What's the third one the Greeks said?
Good.
Good, beautiful, and true. Yeah. For me, what's really beautiful about specifically working within the permaculture ethos is the way I feel and again the word connection comes up, but it's, I don't know, I mean it's like I get out there in the garden that I'm working in and I feel a communion, I think is a better word actually, with the plants and the microbes in the soil and the sun shining down. Yeah, and that's something that, again, I mentioned I was a mystic. I've had mystical experiences, religious mystical experiences, and that's one of those experiences that I have, you know, is that moment where I'm in communion. And it's not even about community. It's about my communion with the earth.
Wonderful. All right, folks. What I propose to do now is actually write a story together. And the topic is obviously tradition and permaculture. But what I want to suggest is that we look at the idea of creating sculpture as a tradition at the Convergence. Sculpture would be not unlike Burning Man, when you have this thing that they create and they burn down every year. I'm not suggesting they go going that way, but I'm liking the idea of cooperating with others and creating an art piece, a statement for the theme of the Convergence each year. So I'm proposing that as an idea, and what I want to do is talk about who might those characters and what the plot might look like, and the outcomes of that sculpture building exercise. What's up? Is that boring?
Let's see.
Define boring.
Everybody has things that, whatever, that they're, some people love cats, and they really get into cats. I could take or leave. So art, I could take or leave. Art oftentimes is to me, that's somebody else's angst. And I can stay away from that. I get enough of my own. So, I don't know. Art isn't anything. I like practical, I like functional. If it feels good and it's pretty, it's fine. But art is...
That's good feedback. I'm just trying to set out, create an archetype, an experience. It doesn't have to be a sculpture, but it needs to be a possible tradition in the Convergences moving forward. Okay, so this is a future tradition, if you can buy that. So, if the sculpture creation with chicken wire and cob isn't all that appealing, then we can figure out some other tradition that we could suggest.
Maybe people could think about something that they've learned, discovered, that's become a mystical thing for you, a pleasurable thing for you in the past year, and bring a representative of it.
Yeah.
And you could share the story or not, but this has been special to me, and I bring it to all of us.
I like that. But the framework of the workshop is tradition, building for the Convergence. So let's try to frame it like that. Do you have any ideas other than just my idea? My idea is just one idea.
I like kind of feeding on this one too. The idea in the trainings that I give for adults and for children, I like to start out with a recognition of, or sort of a self-contemplation of, why am I here? Why did I come? What am I hoping for? What am I searching for? And then sort of setting an intention for being really responsible to myself for doing what I need to do to take care of myself to make that happen, so that I'm not just kind of depending on other people or whiny about how they didn't have this or they didn't have that, but just being like, okay, if this isn't here, how can I make that happen for myself? That's what I'm coming here for. That sort of thing. Just sort of owning what I need to make it happen. And then in the closing, coming back to that and revisiting, did I get what I came here for? Did it shift when I was here? Did I decide that, maybe that wasn't really so important, but I found something new, which is felt more appropriate, or how did that evolve for me? And so what am I coming out with? So coming out with a sense of like a further ability to do my work and be more functional in the world and what I want to do. So.
Other ideas?
While she was speaking, it just occurred to me that, and it's just, I'm just throwing ideas out there because I don't know if it's good or whatever, but like everyone's going to come to the convergence with their own idea of what they want to get out of it. You know, that makes perfect sense. And she mentioned bringing something that represents, you know, the past year or whatever. What if people brought something that represents their intention? And it could be something they've written, or it could be a piece of art, or it could be an object that is like significant to them,
Or something grew.
or something you grew. And I think a lot of people actually bring things that they grow here, actually. So, but making a sacrifice of that to open yourself to the possibility of receiving exactly what you need here. You know, that's just an idea.
I imagine something based on a sculpture and an altar that is an altar, and a space for storytelling. What happened to me in the last year, or here's a zucchini I grew. And I imagined that if we had the materials, if we did have soft sculpture materials, like we're not going to do a bronze, but if it were chicken wire, and it too wanted to be a myth, what myth might it represent? Well, years ago, and we're all into the earth and the spirituality and ourselves and our relations with new people and family and old friends. But if a friend of mine thought, well, back in the day when there were multitudes of civilizations that had multitudes of gods, and they don't care if 9/11 happened, and they don't care if Mount Vesuvius happens, as long as something interesting is going on in the little blue marble, all the power, that's fine. Well, suppose it wasn't Loki and Osiris or anyone like that, it's just like, oh, let's just, give 40 days and 40 nights of rain on those fuckers. What if it were a benevolent gods in the clouds, say a boy and a girl, and they wanted to just have daycare, nursery school, kindergarten playtime, and they would do nice things on the earth. So what if it were a sculpture where a boy and a girl, just to represent, are playing with a ball, and it's the earth. And the earth was what you could attach as an altar, these things that happen to the earth. And in front of it is a thing where you could say what happened, or say, so you could say, show, and share, I think, all in the one. That's what I got.
And what I absolutely love about the permaculture, and I hope we can continue to respect it, like there's no God in permaculture, and there's no politics in permaculture.
Cool. I like the offertory aspect of what you're talking about. All three phases of that.
It seems doable.
Yeah, it does. I like it. Okay, well that's cool.
Yeah, and I think that when you do talk about a sculpture, I like the idea of an altar rather than a sculpture, because a sculpture to me, it almost always indicates the possibility of it becoming an icon, and then you're talking about gods, and I don't think we need gods here. As much as like I personally have a goddess, I don't need to impinge or tell other people, oh, you got to worship the goddess, but that's not something that's about permaculture. For me, it's like, but an altar that kind of represents our collective intention, will, power, our love,
Dream. Yeah, dream. I like it.
And I'd have to go look up the term of altar, but maybe we'll even call it bookshelf or something.
Sure, just a place to leave things, like an apple for a
Right.
squirrel,
Right.
To create it like a Christmas tree, sorry, but.
I like it.
One of the things I would love to see, and we used to do this in like sex positive communities when we were like creating an intention for our workshop, is just calling in whatever energy you want to create for yourself and just doing that individually, because that includes everyone, and it gives people a chance to like learn from others, or maybe they hadn't thought of that, you know?
It's a gate that's open.
Yeah.
What do you think?
My mind is reeling. This is such a good conversation. I spend my whole life thinking about this stuff, and so like, there's no way I can possibly convey it. I do think that ancient cultures always had this divine feminine, divine masculine archetype, which represented the life-creating forces of the mystery, or whatever we call it. There's a lot of trauma in the world because of religion and its imposition and the way of the sacred and the way of what we call spiritual, which to me is just existing and being in awe of our existence. And I just want to point out that most ancient cultures, which we all come from, I like to call them mother cultures, these indigenous cultures that precede civilizations as we know them, all had those sort of archetypes. So the goddess and sort of her, what's the word? It's like
Consort.
Consort, right. And so we're sort of remembering that. And they're not like, I don't think they were ever intended to be like personified human beings controlling us, but like honoring the energy, the life-giving energy, which is masculine and feminine and both and neither. And I do think in the future that we're going to heal these wounds between the scientific, which is really not scientific, as it declares what reality is, because science is a tool. It's always going to have more questions. And this sort of the historical split between religion and spirituality, which science comes from Christian scientists very early in their early beginnings, and for political reasons that split happened. The atheism was like, no, let's break away from the control of the church, and on it goes. But I do think it's wise not to like profess that we have a God, but to honor the life-giving energies of the world and what that might look like.
Yeah, and there's a woman talking about like the Middle Eastern culture. They're like, in our culture it seems like men and women opposite, and in her culture it was like, no, we're partners. We're not opposites, we're partners working together. And I just thought, that sounds so much cooler.
One thing that comes up for me is the Native Americans and their Thanksgiving address, which, if you all are familiar with the Thanksgiving address. So that, especially since we're on this land, any land that we might be on, to honor that, opening and closing, and like that connection to nature, and then that acknowledgement seems good. Also, another thing that comes up for me is the idea that whether we talk about a mandala or an altar or a shelf or whatever it is, we all have these different ways of expressing ourselves, and then this like sense of possible connection or alienation from words. So leaving an openness to expression, to means of expression. Some people like to tell a story, some people like to bring an item, some people like to create something. So just leaving an openness about that feels good too.
How about the ecologists?
So I really like the idea of everyone bringing what they have to offer as far as a story goes, whether the story is actual something, an object that they bring and add to this altar, and they have an actual story behind it, or whether the story is just the item. Because I do think that this time it's unique and it deserves a mythology, and the mythology, it's our stories. That's what it is. And I do also think that people telling their stories, it starts the conversation. Like if we were to do that sort of thing at the beginning of the conference, then the conversation has already started, and you're making connections with those people that are going to make you feel like you do have a better foothold in what you're trying to do personally. You're going to make those connections with those people because you're going to know what people to go talk to and connect with. So.
an extension actually from this idea. In Polynesian culture, they would have these necklaces which were intrinsically worthless, but people would wear them on these great voyages between islands for years, and then they would finally pass it to somebody else in this like cycle of sort of it was social capital. It was intended to nourish relationships, but you would tell the story of like what happened to you when you wore it, and then you'd pass it on, and it would just continue getting passed through the community of these islands to build those types of relationships. So there are other ways of doing something like that, which don't have gods or goddesses, but are incredibly, powerful, as items.
I love the idea of there being like a necklace or something that we pass to one person each year, and that person goes and has their year, and they come back and they tell their story of the year, or maybe it's like 3 people or something, just to, and then they just pass it on to someone else.
I love that idea.
Or even you put it in there, you pick one rather than.
You can even add to it, add a little something to it.
Yeah, like this.
Like that.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah, well, indeed. Well, folks, this is going to be wrapped up. Thanks for coming. I'm planetshifter.com if you want to find out more about my mythology. There's some work here listed as well. Thanks for coming. Very nice.
I'm glad I saw the handwritten sign, wait.
Me too.
And it had some, what did it say that this was called? Myth something?
Myth and
MythShare.
permaculture.
Myth and Permaculture. I just zoomed on down here.
Yeah.
Thanks. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for coming, kids.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well,